It wasn't done consensually. British people never voted for it, for example. People are not all the same from a culture. Of course, there are individuals, but culture is a thing. And they make use of liberal idiots who will sort of have ideological reasons to say that, hey, any pause on migration is racist. To have community, we need to have shared values. How do you have a multicultural community? This is a symptom of decadence, of sort of spiritual collapse, I think, as much. There's a few other factors, like culture is the shared embodiment of a place. So the physicality and the culture, which of course are linked, we are absorbing these all day long. These are impacting us. Okay, it's just me today. It's a solo podcast on Slovenia, my new life here, what home means, belonging means. We'll talk about migration, immigration, the embodiment aspects of that, and from different points of view. Yeah, I'm going to talk about nervous system health a lot in terms of what makes a healthy nervous system in terms of a healthy society. I've got some thoughts on this that have become apparent, let's say, since moving to Slovenia. So, if people don't know, a few pertinent factors. I am from an Irish immigrant family. I was raised in East Anglia, which is like rural UK. I've spent time in Brighton, which is a bit more urban, more like London energy, even though it's by the sea, kind of fun place. Then 2 years in the countryside in the west of England, lived all over the world, worked in major cities, a lot of cross-cultural experience. Current partner is Italian, and we decided to live in Slovenia. Why? Because it's nice. So I have been all over the world. I've lived pretty about 6 countries, 7. But in terms of Europe, I've more or less toured in more or less every European country. I think not Andorra. I toured within sight of Liechtenstein, but not in it. I taught some priests in Rome, but not in the Vatican. But very few. Albania, I think, is an exception, but very few exceptions. And I know them quite well. Like I've been to, say, Berlin like 15 times. I've been to Amsterdam 20 times. I've toured in different regions of France, for example. Normandy in the south, as well as Paris. So I know Europe pretty well. And the rest of the world a little bit, spent some time in Brazil and Ethiopia, different places. Spent quite a lot of time in the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, people know about. And what's really important to me in a place to live has become more apparent. And maybe people listening can do a checklist. How many of these does your place to live have? Like a lot of it as an embodiment teacher is I want to be embodied and I want to be well. And I've noticed that different students in different places are more or less well or unwell based on the place. Place is a huge impact on our embodiment. And I think this is clear when we think about it. So let's say you do yoga. All right, let's say you're a really dedicated yogi. You do an hour every day, 6 days a week. That's pretty hardcore, like Ashtanga yogi or something. It's still only 6 hours a week, right? Maybe you do martial arts 3 evenings a week for an hour and a half. What's that? 4.5 hours. It's not very much. The place you're in is impacting your embodiment 24 hours a day. Just being in it. We are absorbing signals from the place we're in. And that includes the cultural aspect. So the culture is the shared embodiment of a place. So the physicality and the culture, which of course are linked, we are absorbing these all day long. These are impacting us. Sometimes I make the joke that I got back from Brazil, having lived there for 6 months in the favela and the slums. And my mum said, where did you get those hips? Like I had picked up a certain Brazilianness, not from doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu or salsa dancing, or, just from being in Brazil, being around Brazilians, living above a nightclub, working with kids there, I'd picked up a cultural embodiment. And immersion is in many ways how we learn embodiment. Both cultural immersion is how kids are enculturated, and in terms of the geography of the place we are, the weather is important. If you're somewhere that's really cold, people tend to be more contractive. Somewhere really warm, people tend to be a bit more relaxed, a bit more slow in their movements. Not always, but quite often. This includes even things down to like diet, is it very spicy food where you are, or whatever. So, why Slovenia? Because it's well regulated. And it's a very particular set of factors here that have led to that, which I think sheds light on the rest of Europe. So it has Germanic organization. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It borders with Austria. So people here have rules. People are on time for appointments, nearly always. There's little ways this shows, like, if there's a red light, most people stop at the red light, like pedestrians, even if there's no traffic. The Irish person who just crosses the road, they'll look at me like I'm a terrible person. This is very Germanic. Yeah, so rules, order. Now, order can create this feeling of safety for people. Okay. So if you think about like the German uptightness, that's actually about stress reduction. That's what it's for. It's uncertainty avoidance is the term psychologically. So it has some of that, which I really like, but too much of that feels restrictive. So it still has a little bit of Balkan robustness. Balkans are sort of tough, a bit crazy, a little bit not aggressive, but a little bit fierce, let's say, and they can break the rules. So this is also nice, right? Like I went to the post office the other day to pick up a parcel for the first time, and the woman said to me, sort of cynically said, "Look, you're supposed to have ID, but like I trust you who you say you are. Next time, bring your ID." I was like, "Oh, thanks. Bit of flexibility, break the rules." Also, I like that robustness, and you will see a sort of masculinity, particularly in the men. There's still gender distinction. So the more kind of postmodern places, the States, Northern Europe, you can see a sort of merging, a closeness of the genders. Men tend to be a bit girly, women tend to be a bit masculine in their behavior. Now, people might get upset by these terms. That itself is an expression of a lack of polarity. Men and women have different characteristics. We are different. This is a law of averages. Averages doesn't mean you have to be a certain way or you even should be a certain way, but there are averages. Men and women are different in their embodiments, in their behaviors, in their souls, I would say. And that is recognized in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe recognizes polarity, the difference between men and women. And there's actually an ease for me in that. Like I can be a man here without feeling like I have to be a walking apology, which is how I feel in Northern Europe, particularly parts of Germany and Holland, Sweden, for example. It's just like absolutely unfriendly to men and male energy, masculinity generally. The average Swedish woman I've met will either sort of talk to you like a mother, this slightly patronizing energy, which you'll see on, say, a lot of adverts and TV in the UK as well, or will be quite hostile. Germany, particularly Berlin, is the worst place for this, has its own trauma history, so I'm not without sympathy for that. But as a man, it's hard to be around. It's hard to be around. Whereas here, there's a certain polarity. And, there's this saying, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. You're in the wrong room if you're the smartest person in the room. Also feels that with masculinity. I don't want to be the most masculine person in the room. Now, Slovenians are actually fairly soft by Balkan standards. Serbians, for example, before we get after, Ukraine, Russia, way more kind of like yang. But for me, there's still a bit of polarity here, and masculinity is still welcome. It feels nice. It feels like I'm not the only responsible man around if there's a problem. I like that feeling. So that's the Balkan side or the East European side. We've got to be careful with East Europe. It's not technically in East Europe, but what most people mean when they say that, it's just next to Italy, right? It's pretty Central Europe. What most people mean by that is the ex-communist countries. Now, it's a little bit different here. This is a unique history. People might not know this. Yugoslavia, of which Slovenia was a part, was, people would say, a socialist rather than a communist country. Like you could go on holiday here from the West. People had businesses. Tito did things in a slightly different way than Stalin or, the puppet regimes in Poland or Czechia, for example. So it's kind of a soft communism, something that here it said, or they'll say, no, it's socialism, not communism. It was pretty chill. My friend went in the 80s, went on holiday here, for example. Though Eastern Europe generally, and the ex-communist countries particularly, have a lot of trauma. So in terms of the most trauma in Europe, the most you'll see is in Russia, and then sort of moving, Poland, a lot of trauma, Hungary, a lot of trauma. There's historic reasons for this, the communists and before the communists as well. A lot of trauma, just a lot of brutality, really rough compared to, say, Norway, Sweden, or even England. So what does that mean? Well, here, there's actually less of that. So most of A, because of the soft communism they're under, but B, in that the civil war in Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia, was worse than most of the other countries. So Slovenia had, I think, a 10-day. It was the first country to leave Yugoslavia. There was a little war, a few people died, but not very many. It was sort of fairly civilized, as it were. There wasn't genocides or camps or anything like this. And you have to remember, Slovenia at that point was, I think, 99% white Catholic Slovenian, very homogenous country, which I'll come back to. Unlike Bosnia, for example, that was like Croatian, Serbian, Bosnians all mixed up together. So there was a lot less people to fight about. And there's various reasons, just sort of geographically and economically, why they didn't suffer the civil war that the rest of the ex-Yugoslav countries did. So they didn't get that trauma. So for that reason, what you've got in Yugoslavia is, sorry, what you've got in Slovenia is the least traumatized of the ex-communist countries. The ex-communist is important because it means they're not so prone to, let's say, modernity, consumer capitalist mindset. They've had it for less. They had a mild version of it, but pretty chill. And most people kind of had enough. They weren't starving. Life was reasonable under sort of Tito. Yeah, for most of the time. A lot of people look back on it, if not with fondness, with some sense of like it wasn't that bad. There was some oppression, there was some problems, but it wasn't that bad. It wasn't like living in communist Russia. Totally, have gulags and things. So it means they're less traumatized, but they still don't have this sort of objectifying consumer culture modernist mind that's way worse in the United States. The United States is made crazy by this objectifying materialist consumer culture and pretty bad in Western Europe, a bit less bad in Southern Europe, which is the third Europe I'll come to, and not too bad here at all. So not too traumatized, but not too sort of capitalist consumer materialist. Nice combination. This is basically human and well. Third piece of the equation there is Southern European. So Slovenia borders on Italy. You can see Venice from the little bit of Slovenian coast that exists. My girlfriend who's Italian says, quite Italian in some ways, particularly when you go towards Croatia or towards Italy. Croatia was essentially part of the Venetian Empire, at least Dalmatia, which is on the coast, the coastal part of Croatia, places where you might go on holiday down to Dubrovnik, Split, etc. But there's a lot of Italian influence here. So people enjoy life. People like food, and they have that. You know how Italians, they enjoy kids, and they even enjoy their religion, and they enjoy art. Like there's a lot of art here. There's a lot of culture here. Ljubljana is a really cultured city. And yeah, that's. I think that what we learn from the Italians is to enjoy life. Sometimes they say we work like Austrians and party like Balkans, or you could say we work like Germanics and we enjoy life like Italians. They're the three Europes. You can think of them as South Europe, North Europe, and East Europe. Sometimes you hear it as wine, vodka, and beer Europe. You've got like potato versus tomato Europe. You'll see these maps online, but basically the three Europes meet here, and I think they integrate pretty well here. Sometimes it feels like a bit like the flip between the two. It's a bit like schizophrenic. I remember like this. I was having a posh restaurant here, a Michelin restaurant, and the waiter was very stiff and Austrian. And then at a certain point, we said something, and he just relaxed and got really like sweary and Balkan and rough. And I was like, whoa, it's got a bit of a change. But generally, I'd say there's a huge, wonderful integration between these three Europes. They all offer something. They all have something beautiful. There's a reason people holiday in Italy. There's a reason Germany does so well economically. I love these Europes. I love all three of these Europes. I've got a lot of Slavic kind of love, all my Ukraine work and I have friends in Poland and stuff. So yeah, that's for me, it's just a healthy combination of a way to live. Okay, next up, let's talk about some of the physical factors. Eco-regulation is a thing. Slovenians love nature. Slovenia is a very beautiful country. Just Google lakes of Slovenia or something, mountains of Slovenia. It's got kind of proto-Alps, it's got beautiful lakes, it's got a little bit of coastline. It's very forested, one of the most forested countries in Europe, if not the most forested. Actually, I think it's joint top with one other, maybe Slovakia. Not to be confused, by the way, Slovenia and Slovakia. They're both Slavic, but they're a little like 1,000 miles apart or something, 800 miles apart. They don't like it when you confuse them. Slovakia used to be connected to Czechia, so it's a bit further north. Yeah. So nature's a big thing here. People hike a lot, do outdoor stuff a lot. If the Slovenian friends tell you it's just a little walk, it might be a 10-hour hike up a mountain. Apparently, you're not a real Slovenian until you hike the three mountains here. And they're very active. So Slovenes, you see from the kids upwards, they do a lot of sports and they punch above their weight when it comes to the Olympics, for example. I don't know if it's the good genetics of the mix, but I think it's mostly this active culture. The average Slovenian is sort of wholesome, active, in their body, outside, from an embodiment point of view, from an eco-regulation point of view, this is fantastic. So they've got the co-regulation of the sort of Italian, eating outside with the extended family. And they've got the eco-regulation, and there's a self-regulation, a lot of exercise, that culture of fitness, and eating relatively healthy but not neurotically healthy. You still have vegan shops and stuff here. There's a lot of personal growth stuff as well. Like a lot of there's like 7 Aikido clubs in Ljubljana. Physically, Ljubljana is the capital. It's 300,000. So what's that, like the size of like Leeds or Bristol or something? So like not a huge city. Sometimes it's called the cutest capital. I find it very romantic. It's aesthetic. Aesthetics are a thing here. It's beautiful. They've cultivated its beauty. Churches, old buildings, the triple bridge that's famous in Ljubljana. It's just aesthetic. Like I walked to the gym today and it's just like a pleasant walk. They've got trees along the banks again. Like there are I've seen more animals here, like in the city centre, than I used to see in the countryside in England. Actually, one of my Slovenian friends visited me in the countryside in England, and she almost cried when she saw the river by my house, even in a rural area. She said, it's so polluted. Slovenians really make an effort to look after their nature. I think when they after communism, they had a president who really made up a lot of the country a national park. But it's also in their attitude. Like you don't see garbage here. Last night I walked under a bridge right in the center of the city near a housing estate and poor area near the center, and I felt totally safe. It's another thing. You're not like constantly in fight or flight because of crime. It's got some of the lowest crime in Europe. I think here in Croatia next door, lowest crime in Europe. Felt totally safe. And there was a few bottles. Someone had a party sitting by the river, but they were all neatly lined up by the bin, which was full. I thought, oh, look at that. I've never seen bottles, not in a bin before, but I guess they couldn't take them away or whatever. They left them there. The next day I came back, and on a Monday, they were gone. Perfect. Under the bridge, perfect. I'm not saying this is, you will see a bit of graffiti here from time to time. You will see, often there's very little crime. You feel safe. I walk around at night. Like I would never walk around a random housing estate in the center of Leeds or Manchester or Bristol at night. There's no way. There's no way. Whereas here I would. And I think that impacts people's nervous systems. There's a sense of safety, which is hugely important for people just feeling well, people feeling good in their bodies. Plus the eco-regulation, the co-regulation. I said lots of arts, people like music and theater, and there's a lot of arts here for the size of the city. Also, just think in terms of size of city, I would not live in a city above 500,000. So having spent time in Moscow and Sao Paulo and New York and London, God, I'm going to London this week and I'm not looking forward to it. They're all just dysregulating. There's a few reasons for that. One is culture, which I'll come to, but a major reason is just the size. Above 3, 4, suddenly 500,000, sort of Amsterdam, Copenhagen, people are just dysregulated. It's too many people. It's not good. It's really not good. And I think suddenly there's a sweet spot, 300 to 500,000, where you have everything. So, there's an Aikido club, there's a theater, there's whatever you could want is here. Particularly in a sort of place that values culture, is multiple Aikido clubs, multiple theaters. Whatever you're into, wargaming, whatever, it doesn't matter. But without the big city problems, you don't have the urban decay, the pollution, particularly with the attitude towards nature. Like the river's almost clean enough to swim in here, I definitely wouldn't swim in the Thames. No way, you get sick. Like it's, people kayak, and as I said, there's wild animals everywhere. There are bears and wolves in the woods not far from here, actually, just a little bit outside of town. So nature, respect for the place, the size of the place, and aesthetics. Aesthetics matter. If you're listening to this from North America, I hate to say, but with a few exceptions like Boston and Montreal, a few exceptions, your cities are fucking ugly. Like they're gross. They're like a parking lot. Like I was just in Austin, which is one of my favorite cities in America, and it's just a parking lot. Like, there's a few parks, but the actual aesthetics are just awful. Like, I could be like in a cafe in a random side street in Ljubljana, and I still feel like I'm being aesthetically regulated. That's part of eco-regulation, I think, is our ecology, but it's also like the architecture of where we are. Certainly the churches, for example, are beautiful, but it's more than that. It's just a general sense of the place. Okay, next one, social cohesion. So it's pretty cohesive socially. There's not a lot of migration. There's no mass migration. Most of the migration is from, say, Bosnia or Serbia. If people work in restaurants, they might be Bosnian, for example. So pretty culturally similar, linguistically similar. There are some differences, like there's a halal butcher near me, for example, for the Muslim Bosnians. But they're pretty small minorities, so they integrate pretty well. There's a lot of tourists here, but the tourists come and they go, and they also attract the right tourists. It's not like Prague, where the tourists are whoring or drugging, like in Amsterdam. It's a pretty kind of chill type of tourist who comes and goes. People don't like hearing this, particularly my liberal friends, but cultural homogeneity, cultural coherence, we can call it, is a massive factor in people feeling relaxed. And it's not that they're not friendly to strangers. They're pretty friendly. I don't experience unfriendliness. Occasionally, like if I make an effort and speak just a few words of Slovenian, people are generally really happy. Young people want to practice their English. People have traveled. Frankly, there's two types of Slovenians. Ones who have lived abroad who go, I came home, fuck living abroad. I don't want to live in London. Your culture's a nightmare. Your culture's disintegrating. They see it's a complete disaster. Like there's no such thing as multicultural. There's only no culture and monoculture. That's it. There's no such thing as multicultural. Multicultural is like, yeah, I can get like 10 types of food in London, but I don't feel safe. It's not coherent. People don't speak my language. It's not a great way to live. Let's just be honest about it. Even Angela Merkel said that multiculturalism in Germany's failed. Holland has definitely failed. Sweden, the problems there with the different kinds of crime that have happened. And you can Google this. Groups commit different amounts of crime. An Albanian in England, for example, is something like 20 times more likely to commit a crime than a British person. I think it's like 25 more than a Japanese person. So we can't generalize. It's not a racial thing. It's a cultural thing. Um, People are not all the same from a culture. Of course, there are individuals, but culture is a thing, and cultural coherence and ease around one's people. And this, for me, is the great loss of living here. So I love the people. I have a lot of friends here, great students here. Love the environment, the food's decent, all that. It's all good. But I miss home. I miss the ease. Like yesterday, I had to get a bit of, I don't know, simple thing, bit of wood polish for, I made a stain in the place I'm staying at and I wanted to fix it. So I went to the hardware store. Now, Western culture, so still relatively easy to understand, different from Japan, which might be completely confusing. What I was looking for was called Danish oil, actually, and it was there and labeled in Danish, but it took me a long time, and there was some communication difficulties, and it's just a sort of dis-ease with understanding a system. Often, for example, like things you take for granted, like certain foods I can't get in the supermarket, or the post office works differently. I remember in America, where there's a sort of linguistic, let's say, similarity, the post office just worked totally different in the UK, right? And there's a difficulty every day in that. Nervous system wise, being around a foreign language for me, being around foreign customs, not too bad because Europeans are a family. Again, people don't like to admit this, but like I've got way more in common than a Slovenian with a Japanese or a Nigerian. I just have, right? That there's a difference in genetic resonance. There's a difference in cultural resonance. Linguistically, I can guess some of the words. There's all sorts of aspects to this. Actually, genetically is really interesting. Here's an interesting fact I had the other day. The average British person has more in common with the average British person genetically, so another random British person, from wherever, assuming they're ethnically English, for example, than they would their own child if they married someone from Japan or Nigeria and had a child. So they'd have more in common genetically with a random British person. They're like, I think something like the 18th cousins on average in the UK if you're white British. And that's resonance. That's the thing. It's like, your own child has less in common with you than one of your neighbors, which sounds crazy. And look this up. Like there's some studies I saw on this. So look this up. You might think this in terms of genetic variance and various factors. Yeah. So even like, wow, it's more than 50%, right? Which is what your kid is, 50% genetically you, because of the intermarriages over the years. Yeah. So it's interesting. I kind of go, what's the sweet spot there? Like I can also see the exoticism of other countries. They're interesting and appealing because they're different. They're not just stressful, but they are stressful. It's the same with partners. I have a partner from a foreign country and there's an exoticism. The exotic is erotic. There's an excitement there. But again, she's European, so maybe we're like 25th cousins instead of whatever the UK is. I think it's 12th cousins or 18th cousins. So it's like that mix of safety and charge of excitement, that mix of the familiar and the unfamiliar. What I do know, though, for me is leaving my family and my extended family, which are the Anglo-Irish, like the British is half Celtic, by the way. So it's effectively almost half the genetics of Ireland. It's not so different. I've left my family, my literal family and my extended family. And there's a loneliness, a longing. The Welsh had this word, hiraeth, the longing for what you've lost. And that will, I think, always be there. Maybe for my children's children, if I settle here, which I might well do, it might be less so. And I'm very much like, how do we integrate into the land? Like for me, hiking, being in the land, being by the river, nature connection, that's a big part. I'd love to see more of that from immigrants. I'd love to see that offered to immigrants. And I say that, again, as an immigrant, right? This is something we don't really understand, that people and place are linked. So a lot of what comes up, and you might be noticing this in your own body, is a kind of hypervigilance. People have a hypervigilance for anything ethnic, particularly sort of like blood and soil, the mid-20th century Germans would have said. Yeah, I say that for YouTube, so I'm not, immediately banned or de-algorithmed. That example is interesting. We can talk about anything on YouTube, the 30 Years War, Genghis Khan's genocide, but we can't talk about the mid-20th century Germans. not nice people, did a lot of bad things, but there's a hypervigilance. So anything that might be ethnically linked, it's like these conversations we cannot even have, and we need to start having those conversations. I think we need to grow up a little bit. It's not that we forget the World War II experience. We need to remember some of the awful things that happened, learn from those, but we can't have it as defining good and evil on its own without reference to other things, balancing things, other factors out there. I think this sort of I spoke to a baby boomer who I adore, who I love personally yesterday, and it's like Trump is the next, da, 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 and again, and it was like, really, is he? He seems pretty different than Mustache Man. Again, I'll say Mustache Man, which is ridiculous because of YouTube. He seems pretty different. Maybe you don't like him, and I also have my doubts about him as a person. I think he's probably a narcissist, for example, but he's not Mustache Man. Clearly, this is very different. It's very different. And and the right will also say, yeah, you're being literally Mustache Man to the left, and it's kind of like, guys, this can't be our defining narrative anymore. It's been nearly 100 years, right? And what I'd say, why do we not make the 30 Years' War our defining narrative? Okay, why do we not make the Black Death our deciding narrative? There's all sorts of other instances of things we should take into account. And the problem is this: if we totally deny the reality of ethnicity, the reality of cultural homogeneity being at least partly a very good thing in some ways, let's say, if we deny the realities there, it really doesn't help. It really doesn't help. We need to acknowledge that there are difficulties for immigrants like me, or even maybe more for immigrants from sort of more foreign countries. We need to acknowledge that there is a benefit to a culture to not having, to a certain amount of cultural homogeneity. Am I saying that right? Cultural sameness. The blood and soil, there is some aspect of being on land. When I was in the west of England near Wales, where my name Walsh is actually the Irish from Wales, I had this sort of sense of homeness, of groundedness, of being where I was meant to be in a way that I'll probably never have again if I live here. And this profound loss of home. I'm going to be in London this weekend, and I know it will not feel British. It's 30% ethnically English at this point. And I know that I will feel not at home there, that my home has been taken. Invaded is a strong word, but it wasn't done consensually. British people never voted for it, for example. They never voted for it. There wasn't any consent for it. A non-consensual movement of people. It starts to sound pretty much like an invasion. And there's, people who want this. Those people are generally ruling elites who want low wages, high rents. That's a supply and demand thing. That's who it serves. And they make use of liberal idiots who or sort of have ideological reasons to say that, hey, any pause on migration is racist. I'm like, no, it's not. We all limit the number of people who come into our houses. Countries are no different. This is analogous. So let's have this sensible conversation without pointing fingers and calling each other mustache man. Let's understand there's a regulatory component to this, being around one's people, as well as, some places are just better regulated than others, because of their beauty, their order, the German side, the Italian side, because of their nature, the eco-regulation, and even the theo-regulation. Like, this is a Catholic country. People have a certain religious regulation that I think in consumer commodity culture, which makes mammon a god, it makes consumerism, it makes wealth and status and fame gods. People are less regulated because they are false idols. I don't want to get too hardcore religious on you guys, but they are false idols. And I think the effects of that are obvious in terms of people self-medicating with drugs, the sort of narcoticism we now see in the culture, the narcissism we see in the culture, where not having a god, they make themselves god. And there's just a dysregulation. There's a huge, we found this in Ukraine project, that, having a faith or in addiction recovery, they say having a higher power. They give you this, you don't have to sign up to be Christian to be in Alcoholics Anonymous, but you do need a higher power. And that could be religious, could be non-religious. Oh, I would say as well, the sort of spiritual but not religious thing doesn't really work. I mean, here you see, we saw like Easter celebrations, and the whole village, we're in this little village, and the whole village were bringing their baskets of food to be blessed by the priest. Very cute little baskets. And it was obvious this is a village thing. The whole village does this. There's a communal quality. If there's a wedding or a funeral, these things are communal. If a baby's born, it has to be communally celebrated and blessed. That religious element needs to be brought back in some way. I mean, figuring out what that looks like in a multicultural society, very difficult. Figuring out what that looks like in a sort of godless, spiritual, but not religious society where we're all doing our own sort of narcissistic embodied spiritual practices, but there's no surrender, there's no tradition. I think that's very difficult. to know. In many ways, I feel like the question for embodiment teachers is, what does a religion for post-modernity look like? I'm not going to start it because, it'd be a disaster and I'm an egomaniac. But it's, I'll start a cult before I knew what I was doing. But that is the question, I think, for wiser men than me, is how do we integrate, yes, embodied practice, but into a context of ritual and community? These are aspects of religion that are, we arrogantly thought we can just drop that. We arrogantly thought we could just drop, as if it was not, as if it didn't matter, just drop religion, and all its functions would be gone. Just, it's just an old man in the sky, the sort of Christopher Hitchens, who I adore, but it's wrong about religion. Even Dawkins has come around on this. When I see this sort of wholesome Catholicness, you say, yeah, but what about they're abusing kids? Yeah, we should stamp that out. We should make sure that the religion isn't misused for, like, the Borgias in Italy in the past, politically, or, predators are hiding in religion. Of course, they'll always find places to hide. So it's like saying scouting's bad because there's predators in that. Actually, martial arts teachers are quite notorious for being predators in some circles. Like, that's a classic description of a predator. We should stamp, if you have an Aikido or Jiu-Jitsu organization, you should stamp that out. But that doesn't make Aikido or Jiu-Jitsu bad. The same with religion, right? Just because it's used for bad things at times, and we have to be careful with its corruption. I'd say religion's always renewed. You'll see that even in Buddhism, for example, like Thai Buddhism is very corrupt and it's all about money and governmental power. And then a little group of Buddhists went into the forest. They were called the Thai Forest Sangha in the 60s and 70s. And now they've renewed it. And now they're back in the cities renewing Thai Buddhism, which is beautiful. That's what has to happen. The truly mystical heart of religion needs to be renewed regularly because otherwise, people become corrupt. Okay, so we're talking about theo-regulation, eco-regulation, co-regulation, community. To have community, we need to have shared values. How do you have a multicultural community? Sounds good, right? The multicultural London. Well, okay, 50% of Muslims in London think that gay people should be killed. That was a survey that was done. Look it up. So, okay, how are you going to be in community with those guys? That's not my values. I have liberal values of tolerance. It's like the problem with liberal values, and I am liberal in many ways, and certainly in terms of tolerance and freedom of speech and free beliefs, is that only works if everyone else is liberal. Because as soon as some people aren't liberal, they'll start having different views, they'll start closing things down, stopping the liberality. It doesn't really work with a multicultural society where there's non-liberality in that. So essentially, you've got populations from, say, Afghanistan or Somalia in the UK who have medieval beliefs. Like, look up T-boys from Afghanistan, for example. I've spent time in Afghanistan, and their beliefs around how children can be mistreated are disgusting, really disgusting. You can look it up. I don't even want to talk about it. It's so gross. And that has been imported to the UK. Same as honor killings or acid attacks. These are imported things. Yeah, these are imported things that weren't part of British culture. Is it worth it? Like, what do we get for this trade? What would Slovenia get for having millions of Brits came, right? So again, I'm saying this from the point of view of someone who's a minority. What would they get? Some British culture, some diversity, but why? Why is diversity good? Why? Tell me why. Why do I want to be around Afghanis that have very different views on whether kids can be abused or not? I mean, like, I like Japanese food, and it's kind of nice. There's like one guy with Japanese food or a Japanese Aikido teacher. Japanese, by the way, have had one of the most successful societies in modernity without any diversity, though they're being forced into it now, being forced into it. Where essentially the birth rates have gone down across the Western world. This is a symptom of decadence, of sort of spiritual collapse, I think, as much. There's a few other factors, like physiological factors, but it's mostly no one believes in the culture. Like, why would you have kids? Why would you reproduce the culture? There's a slow sort of cultural suicide happening. Oh, there's my YouTube monetization gone. There's another topic, word I can't say. Never mind. Okay. So if you're on the left and you're listening to this, it might be quite challenging, but I would just say, like, hey, maybe it's time we stop pointing fingers and polarizing and said, maybe there's something worth listening to. I think for the boomers, this is probably impossible. But you listen to young people who've had their prospects destroyed, young men who've grown up being told masculinity is awful, or white people are all terrible, or everything Britain ever did was terrible, been lied to in terms of historically, right? There's a lot of historical lies behind this. Sometimes it's really bizarre when people say, oh, it's a great replacement theory. That's a conspiracy theory. I'm like, London's 30% ethnically English. That's not a theory. That's a government figure. I think it was 36% actually official figure. So, okay, this is odd. And now we're having to make laws to say that they're hate crime laws. We can't talk about this. You're hateful if you talk about it. It's like, do I sound hateful? I'm pretty relaxed. I'm pretty in a good mood today. I'm pretty loving mood. I love Slovenia. I love Indian food, all these things. There's no hate in it. And we need to have this conversation. Okay. And I think having it from the point of view of nervous system health, trauma, obviously traumatized populations from Syria are going to have different behaviors than non-traumatized populations, right? We need to include these things. Unfortunately, they have been politicized. So the vast majority of teachers of psychology, coaching, trauma, nervous system health are extremely far left politically. Certainly, if they're on the left by American standards, by global standards, they're completely beyond the pale. Like it's funny, somewhere in like Eastern Europe, they're just like just being normal is what we would now consider in the West far right. It's like it's normal. It's most of the world's normal. It's most of your ancestors' normal. Like most tribal people had a strong sense of people and place, of us, of Gaijin versus Japanese, of Habasha, they say in Ethiopia versus Ferenc, which means foreigner. This is a normal thing. It's a normal thing. We have to at least understand it, even if it's just to say, hey, this can be rough to be on the other side of. Integration needs to happen. How do we do that? What does it mean to connect to the land? What does it mean to be a stranger in a strange land? How might that impact me? We can be compassionate here. In fact, I think we should be compassionate. But let's talk about the real issues. Okay, so why do I live in Slovenia? It's beautiful. People are nice, culture's nice, eco-regulation, theo-regulation, co-regulation, embodiment. It's not a perfect country. Nowhere is. I see the downsides as well, the things that are tricky. Tricky for me personally as an outsider, but also just in the country. There's some corruption, for example. It's one problem with strong networks you tend to see. But yeah, on the whole, there's a writer I met from America who just said Slovenia is the best country. Now, I don't think it's the best for everyone, but certainly places like Croatia, which has many of the same features, Slovenia, where we see a more homogenous population, the nature's looked after, there's cultural, religious factors that are still strong. They just feel healthier. I'm going to be honest. The more I talk to people from Northern Europe and North America, the more time I spend here, the more weird you all seem. You just seem unhealthy. You seem dysregulated completely. Like weird beliefs, weird worries, weird connections, caught in the news cycle drama. And, people here are just having coffee with their friends in the sun and going for walks, and everyone's just more chill. Like, I feel like it's so unhealthy, the general, particularly the online Western culture, but certainly the urban Western culture. You just feel so unwell after you've been in a country like Croatia. Czechia has a lot of the same features. Poland, some though a bit more trauma, I would say. If I wasn't living here, Czechia would probably be where I was living. I don't know Slovakia so well, but I hear good things. Again, many of the same factors. They don't have the post-colonial guilt, the white guilt. It's like they don't have any of that. It's just you tell them like white people are bad. They're like, why? Like, I don't feel guilty about being Czech. It's bizarre to them. The American narratives just don't translate very well. Like the gender stuff, they just think we're weird. I saw a sign up on an electricity box in outside a factory that said, I identify as a Tesla charger. And they're just laughing at people from the West. They're like, it's not, no one's even having the conversation. You can be gay here. I walked by two girls holding hands yesterday. The two gay teenagers, I guess, holding hands. Look like they were a couple. No one was blinking an eyelid. It was fine. But the gender stuff, like the extreme gender stuff, they're just laughing at us. They think we're silly. They're not like arguing. They're not having the conversation and disagreeing. They're just laughing, which is really the response of Africa, Asia, Russia, like South America. Most of the world is just laughing. Yeah, beyond very small subcultures that are not the mainstream. Okay, so Slovenia is lovely. There's lots we can learn here. Let's have the hard conversations. That's the big takeaway here. So I hope I was fair in that. Obviously, if you're Slovenian, you're local, Croatian, get in touch. We've got workshops here. And you can come to some of our retreats here. If you want to be nicely eco-regulated, come to one of our retreats in the forests or by one of the beautiful lakes. Just a great embodiment holiday. Nothing else. It's just a place to be well. That's why I live here. That's why I do retreats here. My Ukrainian team, for example, I supervise are coming to a retreat very shortly by one of the beautiful lakes here, just as a way to be well. It's a place to be well. So I hope you're well. If this comes out before I'm in London, maybe I'll see you there. Try not to stab me, please. That'd be great. Okay. Thank you very much. Bye.